Section 15 is going to cover data manipulation with Python programming. Now, we did some data manipulation back when we were looking at spreadsheets, but spreadsheets aren't always the best solution when you have to manipulate data that comes in different formats. Sometimes you need more flexibility, more power, and Python programming can provide that. Not only Python programming, any other programming language could, but Python was chosen for this course. Now, if you never programmed before, I will step you through some real basic steps to get up and running, and I think you'll really like using the programming language to do this data manipulation. To be honest, I am not a programmer, but I like to use programming as a tool for my job. So I wouldn't consider my profession to be a developer or a programmer, but I do use programming languages when I need to in order to manipulate data to put it in the form that I need. So with that said, we're just going to cover getting started in this section, basic coding, data manipulation, and then how to expand your capabilities once you have a foundation of programming skills. If you want to continue developing and expanding your capabilities, then I'll have some recommendations at the end of this section. To get started using Python, the first thing you'll want to do is look on your computer to see what version of Python is installed, or if it's installed at all. So since we're going to be using Python on a Windows machine, we're going to go through the control panel to find what version of Python is installed. If you're running a Linux operating system, then you can use those other commands over here to determine if Python is installed in what version. So let's go out to the control panel, go to Programs, Programs and Features, and then scroll down to find Python. And in this case, I have Python version 3.64 installed. Now, if you don't have Python installed, you can go out to YouTube and search for Strong Start Computing or ESC4C, and in that playlist you'll see a tutorial on how to install Python version 3.6 on a Windows computer. Some operating systems already come with with Python version 2.7 or something like that, and so for a lot of commands they're very similar and you can get by, but my recommendation is to install version 3 because there's enough differences between version 2 and 3 where some things may not work. So since this course is based on version 3.6, that would be my recommendation, is to make sure you have a version 3 installed. Once you know Python is installed, it's time to start writing some code and running programs. There's many ways that you can run a program, but I'm going to show you 3. That way you're comfortable with running in different types of environments. So the first way is to use Python's idle shell. The second way is use Python's idle editor. And finally, we're going to run a program from a command line, from the operating system command line. So let's start with the idle shell application. So if you've installed it on Windows, you just go to your Start button and type in Python. You should have an idle icon up here that you can click and it will start idle. Okay, so let me minimize that really quick. And so the instructions are here in the reference guide and you can follow along if you want. So let's just go ahead and pull up this shell again. And this is just a little, like a command prompt, denoted by 3 greater than symbols. And this is a great place where you can test code statements out. There's a lot you can do with it, but if you just wanted to test a statement out or two, then the shell is a good place to do that. So let's just type in print hello world, because that's where you start with most programming courses, is the hello world statement. So if you do that, you can see this is the code, and when we run it, this is what gets returned, hello world. So this is the first way to be able to run code. The second way, if you want something that's a little more permanent, and let's say you're going to want to save it and work on it later, is to actually create a file. So if you open up Python's idle editor, you can go up here to the menu, type File, New File, and then you could do the same thing. Type in print hello world. Okay, now we're going to save this as a py file. So the extension is going to be .py, stands for Python. I'm going to save it in C temp, and I've got a code directory or folder here. I already created something called hello world, so I'll just call it hello world 2. You can call it whatever you want. And again, this isn't going to be really useful as far as reuse, but it's just to demonstrate how you would create a file that you can go back in and edit later. So if you're in the editor, you'll see a run command up here. You can type run in run module, or alternatively hit F5. And you can see once again that here's the file that ran and here's the output. Now if we're in the Python idle editor, we have this ability to just go up here and run, and then we can run the command as we just did. However, we can also run this from the idle shell now that we have it in an actual file. So we've saved this code in this path and this file name here. So ctemp code hello world 2. We have a file out there, and if we were in idle editor, we could run it with this syntax. So the syntax is a little confusing, but essentially you just have to copy this, and then you can just change your path name and file name to whatever your file or wherever your file happens to be located and whatever it happens to be called. So if you use this syntax, as I can just copy and paste it again and run it. Then, oops. Okay, we can see that we can run this file or any other file. And one thing to note here is you need to use 2 backslashes in order to, in the path name in this case. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll see how to run, again, since it's in a file, we can run it from the operating system command line as well. A third way you can run your Python code is from the command line interface. So if you open up your operating system command line, you can run that program or run that code by providing the path name for the application, the Python application, and the path to the code file. Now it could be kind of messy or kind of long, because right here you'll see that the path to the Python executable file is pretty involved, and then you also have to provide the path to the code. Okay, now if your environment variables were set up with these paths added to the environment variable path variable, then you wouldn't necessarily have to type out these long path names. Okay, so let's take a look at one of the programs we wrote. So notice here that we have the prompt that is showing right now shows us that we're in the C users stew directory, and that's the username that I'm using right now. So if we pull up this command, I typed this out earlier, but you'll see that this whole path name right here points to where the Python application is located, this python.exe. This second part is the path where I created my file, my code file. So if we run it, we'll see that it runs the code that was in that file. Alternatively, if the Python application was in the environment variable path, then all we would have to do is just type in Python and then the path to our file here. Okay, now right now Python is not part of my environment variable path, so it's not going to run, and you can see that here it says that it is not recognized, and that's because right now I don't have Python in my path. But I just wanted to show you the type of error that you could that you might see if that wasn't the case. Finally, if you happen to be in the directory ctemp code, then you wouldn't necessarily have to provide that path either. So it's really situational. It really depends on your situation or where you're at within the file structure. And so just make sure that the operating system knows where the application is and where the code file is, and then you shouldn't have any problems.